even though we're 5 years out from the first utterance of COVID, people are still dying.
People are still dying, and as we just talked about, there were 290 deaths from COVID daily now versus 5,000 at the peak of the pandemic. So it's not as horrible, but it's still in the same category, maybe even slightly less now than flu. And so it's really important, particularly for the elderly and the high risk, to continue to get their COVID vaccines. In fact, the recent recommendation from the CDC is that people that are in these high-risk elderly groups get another vaccination this spring or summer.
Let's talk about 2020. Really, March 15th, 2020, it felt like the world came to an end. You and I spent a lot of time way back when, and as you look back to that point and to look to where we are now on this end of COVID, when you go back, can you really just surmise what that whole experience was like?
Well, I think the whole experience was one of panic, but also one of uncertainty. We had not had a true pandemic in the U.S. or worldwide of anything anywhere near this significance in our lifetimes, so that people were very concerned, and we were seeing young, healthy people, not just older people, dying from COVID. So there was a real rush by the government and the approval agencies worldwide to develop a COVID vaccine. And that was obviously the critical factor in the reduction we're seeing in COVID over the years since then. There was a real rush to find treatments that were effective beyond just the supportive care that was all we had to offer at that time. So since then we've come a long ways. We've got Paxlovid and other products in the pipeline to treat COVID, and then we also have readily available testing, which was huge in that people could test at home and they didn't have to go into a medical office, and if they were positive, then call their doctor and get one of these treatments after they became available.
Having lived through what we lived through, and the technology that came out of it, and the treatments and the testing, are we more prepared if anything were to happen in the future, say another pandemic, an endemic, anything like that? Are we in a better position as a result?
We are, I think, in a better position, and people would say that's debatable, because most of the testing and the stuff that we've developed was specific to COVID. But the technology, particularly the RNA vaccines that can be developed and produced more rapidly, that technology is here to stay. And then the home testing kits for the antibodies, that also is going to stay with us and be fairly readily adaptable to new diseases. The critical part is that we stay on the lookout for these diseases, and that we respond rapidly like we did with COVID. Most of the new ones don't start out as quite as lethal as COVID was, so we need to be looking not just at for another pandemic like COVID, but something that may be a little less intense in the beginning, but then has the potential to explode.
Are the tools in place for us to, and the research in place future research for us to be on top of these
The
emerging?
the tools are in place for the surveillance. The CDC and the NIH and the World Health Organization have significantly improved their surveillance techniques and what we're doing. So yes, but once again, we have to agree to take a aggressive approach to developing treatments, because there were a number of COVID vaccines in the early part of the program that didn't work. So that we have to be willing to fund something like what we did with Operation Warp Speed to be able to stay on top of these things. The surveillance is ongoing, not just in people, but in animals all over the world, looking for viruses that have a pandemic potential.
You talk about the mRNA vaccines, and yes, the technology was there. It was really employed with COVID. Now, looking forward, that technology hopefully will be able to treat a number of other conditions and diseases.
There are several diseases that they're currently doing studies with, not just the monkeypox, but there was work with Zika. There's work with Ebola that is ongoing. Not so much because we didn't get something put together with traditional vaccines, but as these mutate, they have to be changed, and mRNA vaccines are easier to modify the production. It's the production process is more amenable to producing large volumes rapidly.
Cancer, even though, that's another.
There are a number of cancer vaccine studies in process for several types of cancers, and that's going to happen even in more detail. So what we tell people is that we are at, in many ways, the golden age of vaccines, that we're going to be able to target diseases that we previously could not, and not just treat them after people got the disease, but to actually prevent them. And we've seen that with the fall in cervical cancer with the HPV vaccines. So absolutely, they are continuing. We've probably seen 20, 30 studies this year for vaccines in new areas where previously there wasn't any research going on, or at least that got to the human stage.
What is your response to, there seems to be more vaccine hesitancy, that thought process? What is your response to people when you see the vaccine and what it's done, whether it be COVID or HPV, or should people be concerned about vaccines?
No. Vaccines have side effects in a small group of people that are serious. Clearly, there is the Guillain-Barré, but extremely rare. It's just more common than in the population at large. The cardiomyopathy in the young males with some of the mRNA vaccines, that seems to be lessening, and the good news is people recover. So can't say that they're totally safe, benign for everybody that takes them, but the risk-benefit ratio of the diseases that we're treating versus the rare serious side effect from the vaccines is a no-brainer. It's just the difference is huge. And
What are the lessons that we can take away, we as society can take away from what we experienced? Looking back now 5 years and what we dealt with during this COVID pandemic, what are the lessons?
Well, in my mind, one of the lessons is that we have to be very vigilant about these new mutations and new viruses. What's different now compared to 100 years ago is how mobile the world is. So once it starts somewhere, for most of these viruses, it's going to be much more worldwide, global. So we're going to need to think of surveillance and development on an international basis, just not in the U.S. Now, some of the major vaccine companies are based here, so we want to continue to support them and the vaccine research. Once we've identified something that has a huge panic potential or pandemic potential, we need to start in the early stages developing vaccines aggressively like we did with COVID. And, in the past we've had fears around bird flu, which if you got it was really bad. Fortunately, the mutations on that have not made it more contagious, so its difficulty being transmitted has sort of saved us from that one. So we're going to see others, and I think that the authorities, not just in the U.S., but internationally, are much more prepared and much more aware that we have to do things earlier in the process, and that not all of the potential pandemics we're developing vaccines for are going to happen. But if we don't start early in the process, then we won't have them when we need them the most.
Is there anything I haven't hit on that you would like to add?
Well, we might just talk about that. Even though the pandemic per se, the medical emergency internationally is over, that COVID hasn't gone away, and it will continue to mutate, and people will continue to get infected. And with the current versions, we're not seeing the high death rates from the respiratory symptoms, but now we're seeing a lot more long COVID. And for people that get that, it can be debilitating, devastating for months. So it still is a bad actor.
And hopefully, it's not going to go away.
It's not going to go away. It's going to be like many of the other viruses, that it's present, and that it represents risk, particularly to the elderly, and that it's always capable of having a major mutation that makes it much more serious again.